In all his years of television, Steve Harvey had never seen a stage transform like this. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and a single spotlight fell upon a girl standing barefoot at the center of the Family Feud stage, a girl so small the microphone seemed to tower over her. Her hands trembled, but her eyes carried something ancient, something broken and brave at the same time. Her name was Everleigh Rose, and she was only 12 years old. The producers had told Steve that a special guest wanted to share a dance before the next taping began. He'd smiled and nodded, used to surprises, birthdays, proposals, reunions. But when Everleigh stepped forward, clutching a photo in her hand, he felt the air in the studio change. "This is my mom," she said softly, her voice quivering through the mic. A murmur spread through the audience. Steve leaned forward, the warmth in his smile melting into something gentler. "She passed away last year," Everleigh continued. "But tonight, I want to dance for her, because she always said dance could make pain beautiful." The room fell silent. Even the lights seemed to dim further, as if giving the moment space to breathe. Steve didn't move. His hand rested over his heart, his thumb tracing slow circles, a quiet rhythm only he could feel. "Take your time, sweetheart," he said quietly. "We're all right here with you." And with that, the music began. It wasn't loud, no flashy beats or heavy drums, just a soft piano melody, fragile and tender, like something written by the wind. Everleigh took her first step, and for a moment, her small frame seemed to dissolve into the air around her. Her movements were pure poetry, not rehearsed, not perfect, but real. Her hair floated behind her as she turned, her arms reaching for something unseen, something far away but forever near. On the giant LED screen behind her, the Family Feud logo faded away, replaced by a slow montage of photographs, a mother and daughter smiling at sunsets, laughing in car rides, twirling in dance studios. Each image pulsed softly in rhythm with the music. The audience was no longer watching a show. They were watching love in motion. Every spin, every leap, every trembling pause felt like a conversation between earth and heaven. Steve could feel it, the sacred exchange between grief and grace, between loss and memory. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes before he even realized it. Halfway through, Everleigh stopped. She placed the photo of her mother gently on the stage floor, knelt beside it, and rested her hand on it, as if feeling her mother's pulse through time itself. The piano swelled, filling the studio like sunlight breaking through clouds. Steve pressed his lips together, his jaw tightening to hold back a wave of emotion. The audience leaned forward in silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. It wasn't just a dance anymore. It was a daughter speaking to her mother in the only language grief couldn't silence. Then came the final note. Everleigh stood still for a heartbeat, her small chest rising and falling in the silence that followed. And then she whispered, barely audible, yet somehow everyone heard it. "Thank you for teaching me to shine, even in the dark." Steve's breath caught. A sound escaped him, part sigh, part sob. He tried to clap, but his hands didn't move. For a long moment, he just stood there, motionless, tears reflecting the golden stage light. The audience rose to their feet, applause building softly like a wave that grew into thunder. But even through the clapping, the energy remained reverent. Holy, almost. People weren't cheering for a performance, they were honoring a memory. Everleigh bowed her head. Her little shoulders shook, not from nerves but from something deeper, that strange release that comes when pain finally finds its voice. Steve walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing across the stage. When he reached her, he didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and she stepped into them. The audience quieted again, watching as a man known for his laughter held a child known for her courage. "You did it, baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Your mama's proud. I promise you that." She looked up at him, her eyes wet but glowing. "Do you think she saw me?" Steve swallowed hard, blinking against the tears. "Oh, sweetheart," he said softly. "She didn't just see you, she felt you. Every step, every breath. That light in you? That's her, still dancing right through you." Everleigh smiled, a tremor of peace crossing her face. And as Steve turned toward the audience, his voice trembling, he said the words that would echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. This, right here. This is what love looks like when it refuses to die. The lights dimmed, and the camera zoomed out two figures in the middle of the stage, surrounded by silence, wrapped in something far more powerful than applause. When the music faded, it wasn't the usual rush of laughter or applause that filled the air. It was something quieter, something sacred. The studio seemed to exhale, as though everyone present had been holding their breath through the entire dance. Steve Harvey stood still, eyes glistening under the studio lights. For a man who'd made the world laugh for decades, words suddenly felt small, too small to carry what had just happened. Everly stood a few feet away, her hand still hovering near the photograph on the stage floor. The photo caught the reflection of the lights above her mother's smiling face, flickered, radiant, like she was right there in the room. The audience had fallen into a hush that no producer could ever script. Steve finally took a step closer. His voice was soft, low, almost reverent. "Sweetheart, you just gave all of us a piece of your heart." Everly turned, her small frame trembling under the weight of the moment. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glimmering like glass, but there was a kind of peace in her expression, the peace that comes from finally letting go. Steve knelt down beside her again, that familiar gentleness in his eyes. "How long have you been dancing?" "Since I was 3, she whispered. "My mom used to teach me. She said dancing was like breathing with your soul." Steve nodded slowly, swallowing back emotion. She was right. What you just did out there, that was more than a dance. That was a prayer. The audience murmured softly in agreement. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her face. Even some of the cameraman-hardened professionals who had filmed hundreds of emotional moments were blinking hard behind their viewfinders. Steve reached out and picked up the photograph from the floor. He held it carefully, like something holy. "This your mama?" he asked. Everly nodded. "Her name was Savannah. She loved to laugh." Steve smiled through his tears. "Then you got that from her." She gave a small laugh, nervous but pure. "Sometimes I still feel like she's here when I dance," she said. "Like she's spinning with me. Like the air moves different when I do." The words hit him hard. There was something so honest about the way she said it, not dramatic, not rehearsed. Just truth spoken from the soft place grief leaves behind. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You know, baby," he said quietly, "when you love somebody that much, they never really leave. They just start speaking through the things you do." Everly looked up at him. "Like dancing?" Steve nodded. "Exactly like dancing." Then, for a moment, the camera zoomed out, capturing the image of the two of them, the tall host in his dark suit, and the little girl in her white dance dress, barefoot, fragile but unbroken. Behind them, the screen faded to black. Silence again. And then, softly, almost like a heartbeat, the audience began to applaud. Slow, gentle, respectful. It wasn't the applause for a performer. It was the applause for a survivor. Backstage, Everly's grandmother, an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes, clasped her hands to her chest as she watched the monitor. Tears streamed down her face, but there was pride there too. "She did it," she whispered to one of the producers. "She danced like her mother taught her to." Steve turned toward the audience again, his voice steady but low, filled with that unmistakable weight of truth. "You see," he said, gesturing toward Everly, "the world's full of folks who think fame or money make you special. But it's love that keeps showing up even after heartbreak. That's what makes a person great." Everly looked down, shyly smiling through her tears. He turned back to her, eyes soft. "Your mama's up there right now, looking at you, saying, 'That's my baby. Look at her shine.'" That was it, the moment that broke him. Steve's voice cracked mid-sentence, and he paused, pressing a hand to his face. The audience went still again. He took a long breath, exhaled slowly, then whispered, almost to himself, "Lord, give me strength." When he looked up, his eyes were glassy but bright. "You remind me," he said, "that even in the darkest season, beauty don't die. It just changes shape." Everly stepped forward and hugged him again, her small arms wrapping around his waist. He knelt down, returning the hug fully this time, no words, no cameras, just a quiet connection between two souls who understood the same kind of loss in different ways. The studio lights warmed to a soft amber glow, like sunset light through a window, and for a few long seconds, time stopped. No noise, no stage, no show, just silence, shared between a grieving child and a man who'd learned that healing often looks like someone else's courage. When they finally let go, Steve looked at her and smiled through his tears. "You didn't just dance for your mama tonight, sweetheart. You danced for every person who's ever lost someone and didn't know how to say goodbye." Everly nodded slowly, her lip trembling. "Then, I hope it helped them, too." He took a deep breath and said, "It did, more than you'll ever know." And with that, the cameras faded to black. The next day, the world had already seen it. Clips of Everly's dance flooded social media, the kind of clip that didn't need a title to go viral. Just her small, trembling form under the golden lights, moving like she was speaking to heaven, and Steve Harvey standing frozen, hand over his heart, tears in his eyes. Within hours, millions had watched it. And somehow, even through the screen, it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like witnessing. The comments poured in thousands upon thousands. "I lost my mom last year. This broke me but healed me at the same time." You could feel her mother in that room. Steve didn't just cry, he understood. But inside the studio that day, before the clip became a global story, something even deeper had unfolded. After the taping, when the lights dimmed and the stage crew began resetting for the next segment, Steve asked the producer to give him a few minutes with the girl and her family. Cameras off. No audience. No spotlight. Everly sat with her grandmother in the quiet rows of the audience seats, her tiny legs swinging gently as she held a small silver charm, a heart with angel wings around her neck. Her grandmother had given it to her that morning. Steve approached, still in his dark suit, but his tie was loosened now. He looked tired in that human way that comes when the soul has been cracked open a bit too wide. He sat beside them. "You did something powerful out there," he said softly. "You didn't just dance, you ministered." Everly tilted her head. "What does that mean?" He smiled gently. "It means you gave other people peace." The little girl thought for a moment, her fingers tightening around the charm. "That's what my mom used to do. When I was scared before shows, she'd say, 'Don't dance to impress them, dance to bless them.'" Steve closed his eyes for a second, the weight of that line settling deep. "She was a wise woman," he said. "You keep listening to her voice, that's how she stays with you." Everly's grandmother spoke softly then, her accent warm and fragile. "It's been hard," she admitted. "After her daughter passed, this little one didn't speak for weeks. But then one morning, she got up, went to the studio, and started dancing again barefoot, just like she used to with her mama. She said she could feel her there." Steve looked at Everly, moved beyond words. "Baby, you got no idea how much strength you carry." Everly smiled faintly. "Sometimes, I still feel sad, though." He nodded. "That's okay. Sadness ain't something you fight off. It's something you learn to dance with. That's what you did tonight." The grandmother's eyes welled up, and she reached for Steve's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to stop the show, but you did." Steve looked down, then back up at her. "Ma'am, when something that real walks onto your stage, you make time for it." There was silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that feels holy. He turned to Everly once more. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "People come on this stage every day wanting to win money or go viral. But tonight, you gave us something money can't buy: perspective." Everly looked curious. "What's that?" "It means," he said, "you reminded us what matters." She nodded slowly, like she was storing the words somewhere deep in her heart. "My mom used to say that too," she whispered. "She said we don't get to choose when we lose people, but we do get to choose what we do with the love they leave behind." Steve smiled through tears. "And what are you gonna do with that love, sweetheart?" Everly looked at the stage where the faint glow of the lights still touched the floor where she had danced. "I'm gonna keep dancing," she said. "For her, for me, for everyone who misses somebody." Steve leaned back, nodding, speechless. The simplicity of it, the way she said it without hesitation, hit him harder than any sermon could. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded handkerchief, and placed it gently in her hand. "Keep that," he said. "Whenever you dance, hold it if you get nervous. Consider it your lucky charm." She looked at it, smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Steve." He smiled back. "No, baby, thank you." The grandmother placed a hand on Everly's shoulder. "You ready to go home?" Everly hesitated, looking at the stage one last time. "Can I just say bye?" Steve gestured. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She ran back to the stage, the soles of her feet pattering softly on the floor. She knelt, picked up her mother's photo again, and whispered something only she could hear. Then she smiled a small, radiant, heartbreaking smile and kissed the picture. Steve watched from afar, his heart tight in his chest. And when she turned to leave, she looked back one last time, her hair catching the glow of the stage lights like a halo. In that instant, Steve knew something for certain. This wasn't just a story about loss. It was a story about love, refusing to die, even when everything else does. When the next morning came, the world had already seen it. Clips of Everly's dance flooded social media, the kind of clip that didn't need a title to go viral. Just her small, trembling form under the golden lights, moving like she was speaking to heaven, and Steve Harvey standing frozen, hand over his heart, tears in his eyes. Within hours, millions had watched it. And somehow, even through the screen, it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like witnessing. The comments poured in thousands upon thousands. "I lost my mom last year. This broke me but healed me at the same time." You could feel her mother in that room. Steve didn't just cry, he understood. But inside the studio that day, before the clip became a global story, something even deeper had unfolded. After the taping, when the lights dimmed and the stage crew began resetting for the next segment, Steve asked the producer to give him a few minutes with the girl and her family. Cameras off, no audience, no spotlight. There was a knock on the door. His assistant peeked in. "You okay, Mr. Harvey?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking." She hesitated. "About the little girl?" He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah. You know, I've seen people laugh, cry, pray, but that child? She didn't just perform. She reminded us." The assistant smiled softly. "You mean about love?" Steve nodded. "About how love never really goes anywhere. It just changes rooms." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had comforted her the night before. "You know, I keep thinking that little girl wasn't just talking to her mama. She was talking to every soul in that room who's ever lost somebody." His assistant's eyes softened. Maybe that's why it hit everyone so hard. He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Yeah, sometimes truth don't need no microphone. It just walks in barefoot and takes the whole room." Meanwhile, across town, Everly and her grandmother sat in a small diner, the kind with checkered floors and coffee that smelled like morning comfort. The TV above the counter was playing the replay from the night before. Customers were gathered around, watching the moment where Steve knelt beside the young dancer and whispered, "Your mama's proud. I promise you that." Everly stirred her hot chocolate quietly. Her grandmother watched her from across the table. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded. "It feels strange. Everyone's watching me now." Her grandmother smiled gently. "They're watching your heart, baby. And it's a beautiful one." Everly looked up at the TV again, where her mother's photo flashed across the screen during her dance. "I just didn't think people would care so much." "Oh, they care," her grandmother said. "Because when you speak from love, you wake something up in other people's hearts too." Everly thought about that, her fingers tracing the silver heart pendant around her neck. "Then I hope it helps them," she whispered. Her grandmother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It already has." Back at the studio, Steve walked onto the empty set later that week before the crew arrived. The stage looked different without the cameras and noise. It was still, quiet, almost holy. He stood in the same spot where Everly had danced, eyes following the faint marks left from her bare feet on the polished floor. He closed his eyes, hearing again the faint melody that had filled the room. Then he said softly, "You did good, baby girl. Real good." He turned toward the camera platform and motioned to one of the crew members who had just walked in. "Hey, do me a favor," Steve said. "Make sure that segment never gets cut or shortened. That whole thing, keep it just like it happened. No edits." The crew member nodded. "You got it." Steve smiled faintly. "That wasn't just a performance. That was a message. And I don't want nobody touching it." He walked off the stage slowly, but before leaving, he looked back one last time, that same small patch of floor where a 12-year-old had turned grief into grace. 2 weeks later, Steve received a letter at the Family Feud offices. The envelope was hand-decorated with drawings of tiny ballet shoes and hearts. It was from Everleigh. Inside, in careful handwriting, it read, "Dear Mr. Steve, thank you for letting me dance on your show. That was the first time I felt like my mom could see me again. Since then, a lot of other kids who lost their parents wrote to me. Some said they want to dance too. I think I want to help them maybe start something called Dance for Angels. It's not to be famous. It's to help hearts. Love, Everleigh." Steve sat back in his chair, eyes glassy. He read it again, and again. Then he placed the letter carefully into his jacket pocket. He didn't need to respond, he would, of course, but for that moment, he just whispered, "Lord, she's carrying light." And in that quiet room, Steve smiled through tears, because somehow he knew that little girl was going to change more than stages. She was going to change souls. Months passed. Seasons turned. But the memory of that night, the quiet, trembling courage of a 12-year-old dancing barefoot for her mother, never left Steve Harvey's heart. He'd hosted hundreds of shows since, cracked thousands of jokes, seen countless families laugh and cry under the glow of studio lights. Yet sometimes, when the crowd's laughter would fade between rounds, his eyes would drift toward that same corner of the stage, the place where Everleigh Rose had once turned her grief into something eternal. And then, one morning, his assistant walked into his office with a small smile. "Mr. Harvey," she said, "you might want to see this." She placed a tablet in his hands. On the screen was a short clip, posted just 2 days before. The title read, "Dance for Angels, a tribute to all moms in heaven." Steve pressed play. There she was, Everleigh. Taller now, her movements more polished, but her eyes still carrying that same shimmering tenderness. She was on a small stage in a local community center, surrounded by children wearing white ribbons around their wrists. As the music began, the camera panned across their faces, children of all ages, some holding photos of parents they'd lost, and right there, leading them with grace and quiet confidence, was Everleigh. Her voice played softly in the background. "My mom told me that dancing is like telling the world your story without words. I started Dance for Angels so that other kids could tell theirs too. Because when we dance for the people we miss, somehow, it doesn't hurt as much." The room Steve was in went still. The only sound was her voice. The video continued shots of the children rehearsing, laughing, hugging each other after the final bow. Then, at the end, Everleigh looked into the camera and smiled. "For anyone out there who's lost somebody, this dance is for you." Steve's throat tightened. He leaned back in his chair, blinking rapidly, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. "That little girl," he murmured. "She really did it." His assistant smiled. "She didn't just heal herself, Steve. She's helping others heal too." He nodded slowly, voice low. "That's ministry, pure and simple." A few weeks later, he invited Everleigh and her grandmother back to the studio, this time not for an episode, but for something far more personal. When they arrived, the set was quiet. No audience. No cameras. Just Steve standing in the center of the stage with a single spotlight overhead. As Everleigh stepped forward, she gasped softly. The giant LED screen behind the podium lit up not with the Family Feud logo, but with a looping video montage of Dance for Angels. Children from around the world had started sending clips. Tiny dancers from hospitals, orphanages, and schools, each performing a few seconds in memory of someone they loved. Steve smiled warmly. "You started this, baby girl. Look at what your heart did." Everleigh's grandmother covered her mouth, tears streaming freely. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. Everleigh stood frozen, staring up at the screen. "They're dancing too," she said softly, her voice trembling with awe. Steve stepped closer. "Yeah, you gave them permission to heal. That's bigger than anything I've ever done on this stage." The lights dimmed slightly, and music began to play the same song she had danced to months ago. But this time, Steve didn't stand aside. He turned to her and said quietly, "Would you do me a favor?" She looked up, curious. "What's that? Would you dance again? For all of them. For all of us." Everly nodded slowly. She stepped barefoot onto the stage, the soft melody filling the air once more. But this time, it wasn't sadness that filled her movement, it was gratitude. Her spins were lighter, her steps brighter. She smiled as she moved, arms outstretched as if she were embracing every soul watching on earth and beyond. And there, standing just a few feet away, Steve Harvey didn't cry this time. He just watched, hands clasped in front of him, his lips moving in silent prayer. When the music ended, she looked up and whispered, "That one was for everyone." Steve's voice broke softly as he said, "And it was perfect." He took a step forward, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You know what I learned from you?" he asked. She shook her head. He smiled. "That sometimes, healing don't come from the folks who talk the loudest. It comes from the ones who dance through their pain, quiet, humble, and full of love." Everly smiled, that familiar spark lighting her eyes. "Then I think we both learned something," she said softly. "Because I learned that love doesn't stop when someone dies, it just finds new feet to dance with." Steve's eyes welled up once more. "Amen to that," he whispered. Later that night, Steve stood backstage, watching Everly and her grandmother leave the studio. As the doors closed behind them, he looked up toward the ceiling lights and murmured, "Savannah, you raised one mighty angel." The empty studio felt peaceful. He stood alone for a moment, the echo of music still hanging in the air. Then he turned toward the camera that hadn't been rolling and said quietly, "Not for broadcast, not for applause, just for himself and whoever might be listening somewhere beyond the lights. Sometimes, television doesn't just entertain, it heals. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly, tell us in the comments below. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it a word, a moment, or something it reminded you of in your own life? We read every single message because your stories keep this space alive. And if you believe the world still needs moments like this, hit subscribe, join our family, and help us keep remembering the stories that deserve to be told. This is Stories Left Behind, where human stories are never lost, and where your story might be the next one we tell.